I started these conversations to discuss leadership, mentorship, growth, and so much more from voices you may not have heard from before. I hope the conversations inspire you, motivate you, and give you something to think about. This is Leadership in Colour from myself, Shezak Khan, supported and powered by MIFA. Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Leadership in Colour. Super pleased to have my guest here today, Darren Sital-Singh, who's the MD of Studio Pi, the UK agency. Darren, I'm going to ask you two questions to kick this conversation off. One is, tell me a little bit more about yourself and Studio Pi. And the second, which I ask everyone, give me the story behind your name.
Oh, behind my name. Interesting. Well, first, thank you for having me. It's very pleased to be on. So yes, I'm Darren Sital-Singh, Managing Director of Studio Pi. Studio Pi is an artist management agency that promotes diversity and inclusivity through the representation of photographers and illustrators from underrepresented backgrounds. So there was a government survey off the back of BLM, like many surveys, but probably late or early 2022, all-party survey that identified women, people of colour, those from a working class background, and those living with a disability as being overtly and grossly underrepresented within the creative industry. So we set the agency up to try and address the lack of diversity in commissioning of photography and illustration. So we are owned by News UK. They have been extremely patient and supportive parents, if you like. So we service them from commissioning amongst a lot of other commercial jobs and editorial jobs. So it's rewarding, and probably the first job that I've had, the first role that I've had in my career that speaks to, I suppose, the values and the priorities that I have in my life, certainly in the last 3 years. The name is, the name I was going to say the name causes me trouble. I don't think that's necessarily fair, but the name is obviously sort of Indian in its ethnicity, in its originality. It's broken down in two parts from what I understand, Singh obviously being quite a familiar name, and Sital being a first name, I think I was once told. But my background is, I was born in the UK. I was born in Hertfordshire, and my dad was born in Jamaica. And so really all I know is generations from Jamaica. So I probably would classify myself as Indo-Caribbean, which incidentally, having just filled out the MIFA second part of that survey form, isn't an option on that survey. So Nikki, can you get that amended, please, if you listen to this or when you listen to this? But it's only something that I've recently started to identify with. That I would have before just said British Caribbean.
So firstly, Darren, Nikki is obviously going to listen to this. Right. To think that Nikki even has an option. Okay. And for anyone that doesn't know who Nikki is, Nikki's the general manager of MIFA. If you're not a member of MIFA and you can be a member of MIFA, then you should. Okay. So Indo-Caribbean, that's the background?
I think so, yeah. I don't think it's a regular term, but it's a term that I've decided to start using because clearly the name has Indian heritage, but I have no Indian, I suppose traditional Indian culture in the way that I was brought up. So I'm sure, there are values that are probably shared between Caribbean and Indian cultures, but, I grew up with a very much a West Indian and Jamaican upbringing. So maybe rotis every now and then, but patties, goat curry, ackee and saltfish, sardines and tomatoes, fried dumplings, boiled dumplings. So that if we're defining, some elements of culture via food, it was leaning towards that. So yeah, I sort of struggle when quite rightly people come and go, you must be Indian. It's I feel a bit of a fraud. I'm not. But it's something that I'm interested in exploring. And my mentee today, actually, when I met her this morning, she mentioned that she knew someone who was involved in understanding how your ethnic upbringing and your cultural upbringing affect who you are today and how you operate today. So I'm quite, I've done some therapy, I've done some counseling. So I'm quite interested in that sort of subtle shift into looking into the cultural influences as to why I behave and how I think today. I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah, please do. We'll get you on a follow-up. I think, yeah, that'll be good. I'm sure.
Good, that'd be good, yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear more about it. Okay, my immediate question and thought is around authenticity, because if we stick with the heritage component, the heritage is one part of you. The fact that you're from the UK and London is one part of you. Parents is another part, and then of course your role at work and your relationship with work. So how important is authenticity for you?
I'd say it's important as an initial reaction now, as a response to that question, as a sense of responsibility to the term and to the idea of authenticity following the summer of 2020. But if I'm honest, I struggle with the term authenticity. Like I don't know necessarily what that means for me. And I've had this conversation. In fact, we were going to do a debate at News that sort of discussed what is authenticity and is it useful in your career? Like, how useful is it to be truly and 100% authentic? You know, if there are certain things that I do in my private life that don't necessarily lend itself to being socially acceptable or cool within a work environment, am I offering that? Is it going to affect how I am viewed? So, I have some questions around authenticity in general. Personally, I suffer from imposter syndrome, I think, in nearly every category you could possibly ask. So I don't necessarily feel I belong in a Black Caribbean community. I don't feel I necessarily belong in an Indian community or a Southeast Asian community. I struggle with the idea that I'm from London when I'm from Hertfordshire, but I live in Walthamstow, so I don't feel like I really belong to the counties. So I think wherever there's an opportunity for you to decide which tribe you might belong to, I'm struggling to really work out where that is. Like, I'm in the creative sector now. You'd argue I'm not necessarily within media. I'm in creative services, but my background and my career has been very firmly in media and publishing. So now I feel elements of being an imposter syndrome within the creative sector when I'm walking into ad agencies. So it's, I feel like no matter what I'm doing, I always feel like I'm not necessarily meant to be there, or I'm going to get found out, which then makes it feel like it's very difficult to be truly authentic in any of those given moments. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I think that from my perspective, it feels like you're painting a picture of almost like a man on an island, right? Like you're not part of any particular tribe. And the reality is that, in my perspective, I think you're part of a huge tribe of people who don't know where they belong, or they belong to many places. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, in the sense that there are probably lots of other people who feel the same way, right?
Absolutely. I feel the same way. So my family are Southeast Asian. I remember going to Pakistan as a young child, and people thinking I was Canadian for some reason. I don't know if my accent gives something away there. And then you're in the UK or London, the school that I went to, there were race issues there. Kids can say funny things, can't they? So you always feel a little bit like an out, or you can't. Yeah, exactly. You can feel like a bit of an outsider, and then you come into this industry, and there's things that you can face if you've been here for a while. Although hopefully the next generation not feeling that. I feel really old when I say next generation, but anyway. But the reality is that there is a component of not fitting in anywhere, which could mean that you fit in everywhere.
Yeah. I think, I can agree with that. And I think what that makes me think is I've had to be, I suppose, part chameleon, or maybe not even part chameleon. I've had to embrace it and adopt the skills of a chameleon, right? Because it's felt slightly outsider nearly at every point. So, I mean, I can't really remember too much about junior school other than that I remember it being fun, but secondary school was just an absolute eye-opener with like kids coming from all areas who were just physically bigger than me, cleverer than me, smarter than me, funnier than me. And you're just like, whoa, what an introduction to how competitive life is in secondary school. And then in that secondary school, it was a really, really good one, actually. It was Dame Alice Owens in Potter's Bar, which is now, I don't think I would get in unless I was in the catchment of that street. So we were very, very lucky at the time. But I was one of, I think, 3 brown kids in a year of 180. And then even then, I don't really remember. I remember like 1 above me. So again, you've got to try and fit in there. I remember having a chat with some friends because they know there's like a renaissance of like Blur and then Oasis were having a moment. I remember like feeling like I had to listen to Blur and Oasis and sort of indie pop, when really what I wanted to listen to was hip hop, R&B, but none of my friends listened to it. So it sort of got shamed in a way. And that music meant I had to sort of listen to it on my own or with family, which creates a different feeling around that music than being with your friends. So I never really had that connect. And it's only recently you start to feel confident enough to mention that to some of them. And they're like, oh, but you could have listened to anything. And it's like, yeah, I probably could have, but at the time, it didn't really feel like anyone would have wanted to have listened to that. So again, you're feeling like you've got to fit in. University, I was in Leeds. Again, that was quite an eye-opener for me, separating myself from family, etc. And then my first job, proper job, joining News UK, or News International as it was, as a sales exec. And they were just all rugby, cricket loving salespeople, good people, very, very talented, great at what they did. And I learned a lot. I owe a lot to them in terms of how the discipline and the structure that I apply to my work now. But I couldn't say I was anything but authentic at that point. It was just whatever it took to ensure that it didn't take the piss out of me daily is what I would do. It's what I would do. And then I had, when there was that sort of, what was it? It was almost this waterfall of, more often than not, like white men having to get in touch with people to sort of apologize for their behavior following the murder of George Floyd. That sort of, I can't remember what that, there was a show, wasn't there, on Channel 4 where you had to go around and apologize to all the people that he'd wronged. And someone got in touch with me on LinkedIn, I won't name them, and apologized for how he behaved towards me when we used to work together like 20 years ago. And I was like, was it that bad? I didn't think it was that bad. So I was trying to reply, oh yeah, sure, okay, I don't think it was that bad. And he went, yeah, because I'm pretty sure I used to speak to you in a Jamaican accent. And I was like, yeah, I mean, that's not great, is it? You can't do that now. So, but that's what you had to put up at the time, right? So yeah, fitting in, trying to be a chameleon. And as you said, like a general level of imposter syndrome, which probably means there's a lot of people out there who feel the same. So yes, MIFA is probably the tribe that I feel like I most belong to currently, beyond my family.
Got to get the family in just in case they listen.
Just in case.
Yeah. No, and of course there's truth to that as well. That Darren's giving big thumbs up for those that can't see thumbs because it is a podcast. I feel like that background makes you, and clearly I'm not the only person that feels this way, the perfect person to be leading Studio Pi, right? Because your clientele must have had, or must is not the right word, perhaps have had an upbringing or a background or a story that you can relate to, which means that you can see the opportunities in their background to put them forward as creatives or as what would you call them? I don't know what you classify as. Artists. Sorry, yeah.
Yes, I think so. It makes me well suited to it because there is just wells and wells of empathy for what they're going through. However, it probably in many ways makes me sort of quite unsuited to it because I'm not necessarily able to detach the emotional frustration at the lack of opportunities that they get with and the running of a business. So it's quite a roller coaster. It's very different to when I had my own business before, but it's quite a roller coaster of emotions within a business, which isn't always a healthy situation to be in. But yeah, it's ultimately frustrating to hear that there is young talent who have got talent, they've got skills, they've got an eye, they've got a clear view of how they want their work or their imagery to be portrayed, to be embraced, what people to feel when they see their imagery. But because of where they grew up, or how they grew up, or the schools that they did or didn't go to, they just don't have access to the networks that more privileged artists do have. And it's not just about race or it's about gender. I think that probably especially with photography, social mobility is the biggest challenge, because you end up sort of being self-taught, and there are some technical skills specifically around lighting that you really do get found out on. So that's tricky. Where do you find the budget? Where do you find the money to train yourself? Or go to somewhere like Central St. Martin's. If you're going to Central St. Martin's, you've had a certain level of privilege that allows you to go to somewhere like that. And you come out with a network of people that you might be able to assist or connect with. And again, that's sort of the beauty of what Naren and Naniki are sort of doing with MIFA, is that there's a network. You can go to somewhere and hopefully someone can connect you with someone, which we didn't have when we were growing up in our careers, right? You have to find out the hard way, or wait to be initiated into a network to be seen. So yeah, there's a lot of frustration with the lack of opportunities for them. But when it works, I mean, it's just joy. It's just joyful. It really is. And I just, we've worked with over 350 commissions. We've worked with Google, Empire, Sunday Times, Guardian, the FT, Washington Post. So any commission that comes in, regardless of how much money it is, just feels like an absolute win for these artists. So yeah, I think I'm in a good position to do that. I just wish we would be able to do more and for more people and more quickly. But that's the impatience. That's the impatience almost around DEI, isn't it? You're sort of, if you're involved in it, if anyone's involved in it, you just feel like you want things now, change now, progress now, difference now. And it's patience.
I think there's something in there about not just patience, but of course the education component as well. There's so much time that needs to be invested in educating senior management and leadership, and actually people up and down the organization on DEI, and particularly the equity component. I think diversity piece, maybe people understand, but the equity component. What about the struggles that you're facing on your end when you're trying to put an artist forward? Have you faced any difficulties, or are you usually answering a brief?
No, I think the biggest challenge is raising the awareness of their work. So there's still very much, despite what a lot of commissioners say, there's still very much a commissioning process, if you like, that is based on the existing network that you have. And that's understandable, right? That's human nature. You grew up in a certain environment, you grew up with an ecosystem of contacts and networks which define who you're able to speak with and the work that you see. So in order to diversify the number of people, the number of artists of which you've got to put work in. It doesn't just come. You've got to spend time going outside of your existing networks to find talent. So that's why the agency was set up to surface that, to platform a lot of these artists, to make it a lot easier to do. But the reality is these are busy people. There aren't many organizations that don't feel like they are understaffed, under-resourced, with employees that feel overworked, right? It feels like the general trend for everybody who has a job, who's fortunate to have a job right now. So the frustration lies with the lack of effort that we feel that some commissioners have in wanting to move outside their known relationships, but also the lack of appetite for risk. And I think this is what will probably define the success of Studio Pi, is people's appetite for risk. And it's in two sorts of folds. So even when you're working with small budgets, and I'll call out News UK in this sort of instance. So editorial budgets for photography aren't high. They are in the low hundreds of where you're expecting a photographer to travel to the shoot, have your equipment, pay for an assistant if you think you can have an assistant, do any light retouching, take the shots, do any light retouching, and then supply the images, right? That's low hundreds, which is outrageous for a corporation of this size. Now, the politics aside, they've got their reasons why they're doing that, but that is the fact of doing it. So the lack of diversity in commissioning at that side, or at that scale, is quite awkward, because there becomes an embarrassment of wanting to reach out to new talent when your budgets are so low. So that's an objection. It means you're not going out to new people. And it makes it all the more easier and familiar to work with people that you know, that you've built up a relationship over the course of your career, because the budgets are so low. So you can say, oh, Jim, you know what it's like here. It's only going to be this, but maybe you can do the next 3 or 4 and make up for it. And then so you get the same photographers getting the same commissions over a long period of time. So that's at one end of it. And at the other end of it, when the budgets are high, 50, 60, 100K, multiple day shoots, maybe multiple locations, that's just some stills, not TV. You've got the idea that, well, I don't want us to screw up. I don't want to not only screw up this campaign, but potentially lose a client in this current climate where no one wants to lose a client. So then the appetite for risk again is reduced, right? So going to people who have been able to demonstrate that they can execute that project, not just once, but maybe time and time again. So then you're met with this conundrum of they need to get experience, but where do you get experience if no one will give them the experience? And that's the problem. That's the biggest problem that we face at the moment, is how do you break that cycle of familiar commissioning to give new talent an opportunity to gain experience, to then have trust in them to win the next job. And that's a discussion that not everyone is willing to have, but is quite clearly required.
And I'm worried that the answer to supporting them is to ask them to do something for free, or to, is that right?
I'd say, I think, look, for anyone who's got budget, I'm thankful that they haven't been asking those people to do it, but it will mean that maybe they get smaller projects. So I don't mind that. I think if we're able to talk about the mitigation of risk, and therefore, okay, I understand at £100,000, you're absolutely shitting it about using new talent or someone that you've never worked with on this project. I get that. But what's your appetite for risk then? What's your mitigation risk? Shall we say 50K? Shall we say 40K? Because any project that any of my artists or any emerging talent can get onto is valuable experience, from learning from the team, in crafting their imagery, in mastering behavior on set. There's so many things that you don't realize that you need to be able to confidently do outside of taking the picture until you get on set, until you realize that. So I think that they're the conversations that I'm trying to have with more agencies, with more clients, with more brands direct, that can we talk about a mitigation of risk? Can we talk about projects that you would feel comfortable with this? And then let's talk about that, then building trust on the delivery of executing a project. And that, with some people, it's going well. And with others, there's still a stumbling block, maybe because they only have a deal on big projects. But that feels like the entry point in terms of working with people on understanding their mitigation levels for risk.
And the talent that you represent and support are people of color, women, working class, and those with disabilities. Does that mean those that don't fall into that bucket might find it a little bit easier? And I think we know who doesn't fall into that bucket, but does that mean that those who don't fall into that bucket would find it easier?
It's difficult. It's hard to say whether they find it easy, because it is still quite a subjective view on their art. So, we could go through my 23 artists, right? And you'll probably pick out your top 5, and it might not be my top 5. Actually, if any of them listening, I don't have a top 5. They're all my top 23. But you might have a top 5 and someone else might have a top 5. And that, again, that makes it also complicated, right? So in the work that you do now and the work that I've done before, we try to eliminate any subjectivity, right? If there's an objection, what data-led or strategic-led or thoughts, insights, response can we apply to overcome that objective, so therefore we can work with that client, right? Here, and in this agency and in this sort of area of the industry, it's so frustrating in the sense that it comes down to we like this one over that one, and you've got nothing. There's no opportunity to talk about, there's no levers or handles or buttons to push to manipulate whether you can do that deal. And as a salesperson, you know, for 20 plus years, it's quite unnerving to just pitch, hope, get some feedback, and the best feedback being maybe, listen, absolutely love the work that you did for this. It's absolutely great, but we're going to go in a different direction. Hope to work with you soon. And you've got no comeback to that. You've got no comeback to that. So in answer to your question, it's probably not very fair to say that they have it easier now. It's definitely fair to say that they have had it easier for a long period of time, which is why those shooting the top campaigns and have consistently shot the top campaign, let's say Gucci, Vuitton, Chanel, are the same names, you know, the Tim Walkers, the Rankins, the Nick Knights. It's been a while since new talent has come up and surfaced to the point where they're in the top 5% of shooting that. So I think in terms of the access to some of the networks that more privileged people have, look, I have to say, I went to a good school, I went to university, I have a lot of privilege that I sit with. I'm able-bodied, I'm a man, you know, there's a lot of privilege that I sit with. So intersectionality is an important viewpoint on this. But in the sense of representation, there are probably 25 to 30 other agencies that a white, middle-aged, or a white 30-plus male photographer can go and speak to, versus us, who's only set up to deal with those from the underrepresented background. So I've fallen foul, naively on my part, of a couple of White Lives Matter conversations, when really I should have just ended the conversation in a subjective way around, it's not really what we're looking for, thank you.
Yeah, that's good advice, actually. So on that same note, if we talk about representation in general and your experience on representation, have you seen any other struggles in your career, or are you seeing any current struggles in the industry around representation?
Well, I mean, throughout my career, I've been at News now, what are we coming up? It'd be 3 years in October. So I've been at News 3 years in October, and this is the first time I've had a person of color more senior to me in the whole of my career, in Don Carter, who's EVP publisher of The Sun. So that in itself I suppose, well, it was a big reason as to why I took the role. So I could speak to him and have regular sort of contact with him. But it's quite sad to think that, you know, for 20 plus years, there hasn't been anybody that I could have gone to, anybody that I've seen above me that I could relate to in a business function, you know, in a structure where I can see that I might want to progress. So I think there's a lot of progress has been made in the sense I feel like there are a lot more of those people around now, or at least maybe they were always there. I just didn't know they existed elsewhere in the industry. You know, there was something about never really having got together with other people in the industry who were of color, right? You know, so I've known Dino for ages, I've known Demi for ages, but unless you come across them in the context of business, unlike now we have with MIFA, where there are opportunities to meet, I just didn't know who they were. So I think, you know, representation at the highest level is better, but I still don't really look around and see many more than what Dom and Karen Blackett. I'm struggling, like, off the top of my head to name many that could be perceived as having reached the top level. So they're the sort of challenges that I've seen. Representation at all levels seems to be a lot better. Again, turnouts at events that I've been to just feels heartwarming, doesn't it? When you go to specifically me for events, and like, yeah, we are here. There's many people, and you even greater surprise when you start to find out, wow, so you run your own business, and you're doing this, and you're directing that, and you're head of department of this. There's such a misunderstanding on my part that maybe we were all just kept and suppressed at sort of lower, middle management and below. But there are some really, really impressive people doing really, really good things. It just needs more airtime. You know, it just means more space with which to be able to promote that, so that, as you said, the younger generation, as we start to feel old, can be inspired by that. So, you know, the stuff that you're doing now with the podcast and the leadership group within MIFA, I would have loved to have had that when I was young. It would have been just so inspiring to feel like there was somewhere you could go to ask for help, to ask for advice, rather than feeling like, again, you know, that outsider, and that adding to that feeling of lack of belonging. I'm not sure I've answered your question properly there, but that's my immediate thoughts on sort of representation. There's still a lot of work to be done, obviously.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's... No, there's no wonder here, actually. The reality is, you're right. There wasn't enough representation of people of color within leadership. And by the way, I also served under Dom Carter.
I forgot that.
I was over at News.
Yeah.
The legend that is. He used to have a fantastic purple whistle when I worked there. I don't know if he still brings that out.
No, thank God.
He looked only man I've ever seen that can really pull off a purple suit. Looked fantastic in it. But anyway, look, that aside, it's not that sort of podcast. You're right that we didn't really have representation, although I did always see Dom. But I'm wondering if there's been a bit of acceleration post 2020, and now we're just kind of coming up to the edge and that tipping point where hopefully we're going to start seeing more people of color around the table. A little bit like, and I know I've drawn these parallels in other conversations as well. If we look at the framework of women in the workplace and the struggles that they face, and I appreciate they still have struggles in the workplace, but I do feel like a spotlight was shone on the issues, and we as an industry, or industries, or the working world has tried to support them. I'm wondering if this is now the time for people of color to get more of us around the board as well, around the top table.
Around the board, wow. I mean, I'd probably at this moment in time settle for like senior leadership, let alone the board. I mean, the struggles of women in the workplace are still quite evident, aren't they? And I think, even though there's publishing of the gender pay gap, the publishing of those figures are still shocking. So public, it feels like everyone's patting their backs on, oh, great, well, we published. It's like, yeah, but you published a shocking set of results. What are you doing about that? And then nothing really happens. And then we move on a year, before we know it, another 12 months have gone and it's not really moved on. So yes, to a point, it would be nice to have things like ethnicity pay gap reporting. I think there are milestones that could happen that could help everyone, but I'm not sure even in the publishing of that data, it's going to actively affect the change that we need. So I think it would be nice to see more people coming into industry. I mean, I don't know what it's like at Criteo, but certainly at News, there is a definite leaky bucket situation. There is every effort made, and look, applaud the HR team and the diversity team for the efforts made at outreach, for apprenticeships, for graduates, for scholarships. I think that's brilliant that work's being done. But if your company culture is one that when these, and maybe it's slightly disrespectful to say young, when the emerging talent come into your business and they look around and they think, nah, I'm not sure this is the place for me. That's the saddest thing for me, that you've spent all this money, you've gone to all this effort, you've invited people in, but what you're showing them isn't somewhere that they feel they want to be. And what does that say about an organization that can do that? I don't feel it's very hard to make people feel included. I just don't think it's that difficult to listen to people. I don't think it's that hard to give people an opportunity to tell you how they feel. Don't get me wrong, I've got a very diverse team, and with diversity comes complexities in managing, right? Different communication styles, different styles of working, different flexibility in whether working from home or hours and things like that. And you have to be a confident but flexible manager to manage diverse teams. That's definitely my number one learning about having the most diverse team ever. I love them for everything that they bring to Studio Pi, but it's not without its subtle and nuanced challenges. But I think we're able to do that within News, but there's obviously something about the organization that means that that talent decides to go and find somewhere else. And you see that in a lot of the chatter within MIFA. You see that with a lot of more senior people leaving to set up their own businesses or to join, Black or brown owned businesses. So it's frustrating that the level of progress that we're seeing, I think, at grassroots, which I think is what you're sort of alluding to, is that we're seeing more of a swell, more of an energy, more of an interest of coming into our sector, but that retention of it is still going to be the biggest factor about whether to do it. What's it like at Criteo?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would say that when I first joined Criteo, it wasn't massively diverse, but over the last 4 years, we've done a great job of becoming a lot more diverse. Post-pandemic, which is, by the way, a phrase I hate because it's been years now, isn't it? Nowadays, maybe it's the phrase. Nowadays, we don't catch up as much as we used to. We're of course we're not really in the office.
No.
And
those media Thursdays.
So if we get together for like a media Thursday or whatever it might be, and you look around the group, I'm so impressed with the diversity that I see. I have to say, and I wouldn't say this if it wasn't true, we've done a great job. And I would put a lot of that down to the hiring of Rachel Shield, who leads on our DEI efforts globally. And from a women in the workplace perspective, I have to say I'm super proud of our CEO, Megan Clark, who introduced pay parity. So for women work. Yeah, so it's
amazing.
Yeah, exactly. That deserves a wow. So,
but also, should it be amazing? Isn't that weird? Isn't it?
I know.
I'm shocked, and I'm like, wow, that's incredible for something that should be just normal.
I don't know how I feel about that. I know exactly what you mean, but I also feel like we need to be celebrating. It's a little bit like when people were talking about I'm not going to name names because I don't want to split the audience, but big hiring in politics and in large organizations, at the top. I said, well, his values aren't the same as ours, and we shouldn't celebrate it because it's a personal color.
Oh, okay, I know what you mean.
You know what I mean? I sort of think, well, I hear you, but it's still a person of color. It still probably went through, or a woman, or someone with a disability, or whatever it might be, working from a working class background. They've had some level of struggles, and at this moment, they've won something. We should celebrate that if we want to get behind them. If we don't want to get behind them, maybe we just don't say anything. But
I know. I know what you mean. I remember the conversation. I think didn't it blow up a little bit on the MeFit chat as well for a little bit. I remember I'm not getting involved in that, but I think I share your view on it that relatively they've had challenges, right? They might not be my challenges, they might not be your challenge. In fact, almost certainly not our challenges, but there's still challenges, right? There's still challenges to being different and viewed as an other in whatever network that you're operating in, whether that be Eton or not. So yeah, I think I think I'd err on the side of let's allow them the achievement that they have made in spite of what they've had to endure, irrespective of whether I agree with what their views are or not. Yeah,
it's just the point is, if you go back to it, by the way, for those who haven't connected the dots, it's Rishi Sunak. We're talking about Rishi Sunak. We should move on anyway. So you kind of touched on grassroots. What's your advice for someone joining the organization, or joining the industry today, I should say?
Joining the media industry?
Indeed.
I think it's slightly ironic, given that News UK doesn't currently have an employee resource group for race, ethnicity, diversity. But I would seek out the internal groups. I would seek out support, like navigating those early days, not only of your career, where you're trying to, maybe it's the first time that you've ever been in a corporate environment or a working environment. That in itself is quite a change to what the studying life, on the assumption that these are students or they're coming from a non-working background. But the switch to coming into working life, just build a network around you that you feel you can have honest and vulnerable conversations with, because again, only off of what I couldn't have any of that. You couldn't ask those questions. You were viewed as weak. You were viewed as, and if you were viewed as weak, you were worried that maybe you weren't going to last or get the big accounts or get the big agencies. You had to show or project an image of sort of toughness and steel and resilience and confidence, which not everybody has. So I think I would definitely recommend in reaching out to any existing organizations or networks or infrastructure that currently exist within your organization, because they're set up to help talent come in, bed in, and survive, and then progress. I think it's all about getting through the early stages, getting used to the teams that you work with. The manager style, again, is you are at the mercy of who that person is and how they like to operate, their own bias. So again, establishing a relationship with them. But I think, seek out support. And if there isn't that support within the organization, there are external organizations. We're doing a lot of bigging up for MIFA, right? But there are others that you can connect with and seek out and find mentors. A lot of people say, they're not going to want to hear from me. But there is nothing a senior person likes more than having their ego massaged about how great they are and how much you'll learn from them if you could have a coffee with them, etc. I'm going to speak from experience in two ways. One, I've had to do it with people to get their attention, and it's worked. And two, people have done it to me, and it's worked. So I think the more you can lean into relationship building, I think the quicker you can find your feet and start to understand where you fit maybe within that organization. And if not within that organization, where you fit within the industry. Being my immediate advice.
I think it's good advice for anyone in any industry, to be fair.
I think so.
Yeah, irrespective to media, just networking. I think networking in general. There's this this book. Let's see if I can find it. It's called The First 90 Days. I can't remember who wrote it, but in that book, it does talk about your board and setting up your board. And I always thought that was great advice. So internally, knowing who sits where and who you can call upon for particular support.
Yeah. Your personal board, you mean?
Your personal board.
Yes. Yeah. And
externally, I think it's really important to do the same thing. And maybe it's not a board, it's a network. It's a group of advisors. I do think that joining MIFA, or I know a couple of my colleagues are members of BEMA, Bloom, Women in Programmatic Network. Think of any others that I don't want to offend by not naming them, but there are lots. I mean, to be fair, you've even got industry ones, right? Like AOP, IAB, so on and so forth. You've got so many.
Yeah.
We do some work with the Advertising Association as well. Some great work actually with those guys. I think just that as soon as you get people together and you allow them that space to check in on each other, you can see a little bit of growth.
Because we're human, right? I think there's for so long, there just wasn't, you weren't allowed to consider people as being human, like colleagues. Some of the stuff that got said, my first job at News, just I don't even feel comfortable saying any of it out loud with how inappropriate it was at the time. But that was, it was classed as banter. And bants, I can't stand that phrase. It's so triggering for me in terms of what bants was at that time. So just culturally, just being able to feel comfortable and to build a network where you can build your confidence before anyone else tries to sort of smash it or dent it or take it away, because it's hard enough. Like, work is hard enough. It's called work for a reason, right? It's already challenging enough. So ensuring that you can do it with good people around you, inside or outside the organization, is just, it's crucial to development. And it's just so much more, the industry is so much more set up to helping people understand each other as humans. What do they need? How do you communicate? We mentioned obviously one of the selection criteria for the agency being living with a disability, but the clarification on that is visible or none. The idea that people digest and ingest information in different ways, that their communication styles are different. I remember going on a training course with the leadership team at Shortlist. I think it was a 2-day thing, and the first morning was all about understanding each other's communication styles, because at the time I think we were probably, few egos in the room, probably feeling like we didn't need to do that, or this is my way, etc., etc. And it was fascinating listening to how people digest. One is overly analytical, so if you're going to go and speak to them, you have to make sure that you've got all the data, all the information, because that's what they need. Others were just big sky thinkers, so don't bother them with the data. They only want to know what's the macro in terms of the situation that you're discussing. Don't bother me with that. Others were all about emotion, so you got to make sure you understand that side of them. Others were all about ego. It's fascinating to sort of understand that, and I suppose that moves into NLP, doesn't it, in terms of the way that people understand how they communicate with each other. But I feel like that's being offered quite a lot more freely by employees, by team members now than it ever used to be. I identify like this, or I react to things like this. There's a lot more openness about that, and it's uncomfortable, I imagine, for many people. It's uncomfortable for me as a 45-year-old guy. It's not always easy to hear that, but the benefits of then understanding it and being able to adapt how you work with your team to understand what their strengths are. As I said before, referenced before, it's a lot more work for me, but the ultimate reward is that we are better as a team when we come together. We're much more dynamic, we're much more effective, we're a much more high-performing team, having understood each other for that. So I think the current crop that are coming through should continue to educate us who are in more senior positions on what's best for them. It rubs both ways, right? There's a little bit of flexibility required both ways. But I think the more that we can understand the talent that comes into our business, the better we can help them flower, grow, progress, flourish. I think that's important, understanding the human side of things.
Absolutely. Darren, I really enjoyed the conversation today. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy man.
Oh, thanks, It's been good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I would say that I'll ask your opinion on this. It feels like the theme and the message is communication, right? So like communicate with your talent, be it your workforce of color, or it could be whichever diverse groups your workforce comes from, and continue that investment in the communication. Does that feel like the right theme for you?
I'd narrow it even further, and I think it's a particular type of communication. It's empathy.
Empathy.
Right? It's putting yourself in their shoes. For anyone that wasn't sure what empathy, in a non-patronizing way, what that meant, but it's the more I've been able to do that in my home life as well as my professional career, the better I have at understanding what that person needs from me as a manager to be successful. And that will uncover some uncomfortable conversations. But the more I think you can be empathetic with your teams, with your colleagues, the better and the stronger those relationships will be. And as a result, all of you will benefit from that. So yeah, I'd agree with that.
Perfect. I couldn't put it better myself, and I didn't. Good to see you, Darren. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Bye.